I'd like to welcome everyone on the call today for this very special chance to hear from leaders in VA psychology training. Our topic today is how to get a VA Postdoctoral Fellowship, an hour with the experts. I'm Monica Roy, and I'm the past VA section chair with Division 18, Psychologists in Public Service. Before we get started with our speakers, I'd like to briefly talk about Division 18. We're psychologists in public service, and we're co-hosting this call. We're made up of psychologists who serve in many capacities, including within the VA. And we are the only section within the American Psychological Association that represents VA psychologists. I wanted to let everyone know that we actually have a new student advisory board that works closely with the VA section executive committee. And if anyone is interested in joining Division 18 or the VA section, please feel free to contact me, Monica Roy. My email is in the notes section of your screen. And for one last note before we start introductions, all questions can be entered into the chat box as we move along through the presentation. We'll be waiting until the end of the presentation to answer any questions, but we will be keeping track, so if you have a question in mind, feel free to type it in. And I want to make sure that we can do some introductions and move right into our agenda for today because it's pretty packed. I feel very fortunate to introduce our knowledgeable speakers, starting with Dr. Allison Asped, who is the past Secretary and Treasurer of the VA Psychology Training Council and is currently the Director of Psychology Training at VA Puget Sound. Dr. Sherry Boudreau, she's the Co-Director of the VA Advanced Fellowship in Mental Health Illness Research and Treatment at the Sierra Pacific MIREC at VA Palo Alto. Dr. Dana Holohan, she's the chair of the VA Psychology Training Council and serves as the director of training at the Salem VA Medical Center. Dr. Jamila Jackson, she's the co-chair of the VA Psychology Training Council's Multicultural and Diversity Training Committee and the director of psychology training at the VA North Texas Healthcare System. Dr. Joel Schmidt, he's the past chair of the VA Psychology Training Council and serves as the director of training at the VA Northern California. And Dr. Wayne Siegel, who's the past chair of the VA Psychology Training Council and is the director of training at the Minneapolis VA. Now I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Siegel, who will start us off.
Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on what time zone you're located in. I'm going to start off by talking about searching for postdoctoral positions in the Universal Psychology Postdoctoral Directory, also known by the letters UPPD. So the UPPD is a recommendation that came out of the 2016 Postdoctoral Training Summit. And the idea was to have one place to search for postdoctoral programs. Up until that time, there was not a main directory. There was the APIC directory that only had APIC member programs in it, but there's about 3 to 4 times as many programs listed in the UPPD as there are in the APIC directory. So currently there are about 1,050 listings of postdoctoral programs in there. The UPPD also has advantages over the APIC member directory, that it was built for postdoctoral programs, so you can search by factors that are specifically related to postdoctoral training, like specialty and emphasis area, which makes it a lot easier to find programs that you'll be interested in. You can also search for city, state, start date, and a range of factors related to postdoctoral trainings. So because there is not a known universe of postdoctoral programs, not every single program that is out there is listed in the UPPD. We believe that we have made great strides and progress in getting programs listed in there. Since we don't know the total universe of programs, we don't know the exact percentage, but we believe it's between 80 and 90% of programs. And the programs that are probably most not represented in UPD are those that are very strictly research-focused programs, and then there's a range of neuropsych programs that may not be listed. But again, there are many of those type of programs in there, so it's worth searching. but that we may not have all of those programs in there. So how do you access the UPPD? You have probably seen countless emails from myself. If you're subscribed to the APIC Postdoc News listserv, you've also maybe received some direct emails from me as well also. But you can go to the APIC website at appic.org, and right across the top menu there is a tab that says Postdoc. And if you just hover on that, the first listing under that is a link to the UPPD. So you can go to the Universal Directory, and that first page has all those search fields that we had mentioned, and you can type in a range of search fields, keywords. We recommend that people try and search by using different types of keywords and variables to try and find programs. The other thing that's really important about postdoctoral training in general and using the UPPD is programs vary on when they update their listing, so it's not as organized as with internship. So if you do a search today, you might want to do a similar search in a week or two to see if there are new programs that are listed in there. We also struggle with getting programs to update their listings. So programs that were in there last year, many have updated their listings, but you may notice that some are not updated. And so there'll be the programs are still in there, but you'll see kind of a notice that it hasn't been updated. That does not mean that the program doesn't exist, but we encourage you contact the training director. The email listing's in there, the website's in there, and kind of ask, are you still accepting applications for this year? And it would be helpful to also let them know that their listing in the UPPD is not up to date, and that would be a good thing for them to get that updated. If you have questions about the UPPD, you could contact me directly. My email is listed at the bottom of that main page, and I would be happy to answer questions. The other thing that I think is important about the UPPD and postdoctoral training is applying to an accredited program is really important for internship, particularly if you want federal employment later. That is not as critical for postdoctoral programs. And with that, we have opened up the UPPD for all programs. So anybody who has a postdoctoral program can list their program in there. So there is no process for vetting programs. So if it's not an APIC member program or an APA accredited program, doesn't mean it's a bad program, but you want to be somewhat cautious. Is this an existing program that's been around for a while? Is it something that you're going to be interested in applying to? And there are some listings in there, maybe from private practices or other entities, where people have just put in a listing, and it isn't necessarily a program per se. It is maybe hours where you get supervised experience for licensure, but there's not a quality assurance that is done for those listings. So what we say is buyer beware. But again, doesn't mean that it's a bad experience, but you want to kind of go in with your eyes wide open and ask questions. So I think that is it for me in terms of the UPPD. I will turn it over to our next speaker.
I think next we have Dr. Sherry Boudreau.
Oh, let me just, I guess, cover Apicas. I didn't really get into that. I'm sorry for that. So, APIC and the postdoctoral work group put together, I believe 4 years ago now, a centralized application system called Apicas. And it's a similar idea as the APPI for internship, although it's structured differently. So there's a base application, and then programs are free to ask for specific or very tailored information. Now, it's important to know that Apicas is used by a lot of programs, but is not used by all programs. And so you need to kind of find out when you say go to the UPPD, or if you learn about a program the other way, how are they receiving their applications? Some just want you to email them to them, and some will use Apicas. And And you can fill out that base application, and that will apply to many programs that accept applications through Appicast. But then the specific programs may have very unique requirements in terms of the number of letters, maybe a work sample, or other things that they're wanting. And so you really kind of want to pay special attention to what are those specific individual programs and what are they wanting from you. And then was also asked to talk a little bit about reciprocal offers, and so hopefully people are aware of the postdoctoral selection guidelines. And I think they're going to be covered in more detail later. But in terms of a reciprocal offer, so the guidelines ask programs to wait to make offers until February 25th, 2019. So programs following the guidelines should not be making offers. And we believe the majority of programs are following the guidelines, but there are programs who aren't. And so if you get an offer before February 25th from a program that is not following the guidelines, and they're not your number one ranked program, you could then email, call, contact your number one ranked program and let them know that you have an offer for a position, and you could ask that number one ranked program for a reciprocal offer. So they could make you an offer on the spot if you are their number one ranked applicant. Okay, so this is a way to prevent programs that are not following the guidelines from taking applicants away from their preferred programs and trying to level the playing field. But you have to understand the process of being able to request a reciprocal offer, and what is that about. So I've covered this very briefly. Strongly recommend that people go to the APIC website under postdoctoral programs. There's a link to the guidelines. Read them very carefully. Try and understand what that reciprocal offer means. If you have questions, talk to your internship director, or you could contact me or other members of the postdoctoral work group directly for clarification on what that means. There's also a video that you could watch about postdoctoral training, and there are recent recordings of webinars that we've held that kind of go through the guidelines and reciprocal offers in a little bit more detail. Okay, so with that, I will turn it over. Sorry about that.
Great, I think that's me. This is Sherry Beaudreau, and I'm going to start sharing my screen just to make it a little interactive for you. One quick question, are there any, I'm assuming everybody on here is psychology, getting their PhDs. Is there any MD on here, any residents by any chance? If there are, maybe if you could do a Y in the box. Oh, speak up. Okay. I'm going to put my volume up. Is that better? Can you hear me okay? Okay, so it doesn't look like we have any MDs. The reason I'm asking, so I'm the co-director for the national hub site for the VA Advanced Fellowship in Mental Illness Research and Treatment. And as the hub site, we're sort of the coordinating center for the 26 sites in our program. So we have 26 different sites to choose from. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in the next 5 minutes. So until I think 25 after here. The program is funded by the Office of Academic Affiliations, OAA. And we've been in existence for a while, I think since 2001, and have expanded over the years. What we do, we have at each site there's one new MD fellow and one new PhD fellow. So it sounds like we don't have any MDs here, but you could share it with any colleagues that you have who might be residents and finishing up residency. At these 26 sites, we focus on veteran mental health research. So this is a research fellowship. What's unique about it, if you have interest in research but also wish to get licensed and also wish to have time where you're involved in clinical training as part of that time, so we allot 25% of the time for clinical training in a clinic. However, a number of our sites, with the majority of time being in research, often are interfacing with veterans or doing direct service delivery. So as a result, we have a number of our sites that are getting APA accreditation. So we do have programs that are APA accredited. As Dr. Siegel had mentioned, it's not required necessarily for, depending on what you're looking for, to have a site that's APA accredited. However, we do actually have a number of our sites that are APA accredited and allow for, and actually expect that fellows at the end of a 2-year fellowship, I should mention that's a 2-year fellowship, will have sufficient hours to go forward for licensure. So that's certainly supported, I think, at all our sites. I can't imagine that it wouldn't be. The veteran research that's done at the 26 sites is relevant to the mission of the Center of Excellence that hosts them. So many of ours are MIRECs. I don't know if folks, do folks know what MIRECs are? You can put Y's in the chat box if you do. Yes, we got some there. It stands for Mental Illness Research, Education, and Clinical Centers. But we also have SMITRECs for serious mental illness who are involved. Other centers of excellence where they might have a mental health or suicide focus, addictions. We have national centers for PTSD that are also part of our site. So there's some variety there. We have one CSAM. So we really have a variety there. If you have interest in pretty much any area that is important for veteran mental health, PTSD, comorbidity, substance abuse, or substance use disorders rather, dementia or issues related to the older veterans, serious mental illness, suicide, these issues are represented across our different sites. What we do, our fellow outcomes, many of our fellows go on to have VA careers, which is great. And I think it's like 75% of our fellows. The goals are to have fellows move on to either a VA career that would be either in a research center or occasionally within a clinic, but they're also involved with research duties as well, or a university academic setting. So it's really meant to be preparation for an academic career. And we're excited that we actually are feeding people into leadership positions or research in VA. So that's always a wonderful outcome. There's training on publishing papers, manuscripts, as well as training on grant writing. And there's a very well-developed didactic that we offer every week that's required twice a month, but fellows can attend every week. That's offered to all our fellows that come through the program. So again, it's a 2-year program. It's a clinical research fellowship. It allots some time for direct clinical service in a clinic as well as service delivery in the context of research. And it is a nice mix if you are thinking about, the fact you're interested in an academic career but want to also retain and get that license, because that can be harder to find. And I know when I was, it's been a while now, but when I was looking for fellowships, that was something I actually found very hard to find. So if there are questions or you'd like more information, the best thing you can do is email me at my VA email address. I can even put it in the chat box there. And we're very happy to send materials. I'm also going to be sending some materials, I think, to Dr. Holohan so that some of the training directors can have that as well. I'm going to end there. That's my 5 minutes. Thank you so much, and we can answer questions afterwards during the time that's allotted. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, yes, sir. Perfect. Wonderful. So I'm Allison Oxford. I'm delighted to be here with all of you today for this webinar. I want to talk a little bit about the current thinking on the role of postdoctoral training in the trajectory of psychology training overall. So I think it's evolved over time, and more distally, this was something that was really reserved for advanced research skills. And then in the 90s, when APA began accrediting postdoctoral programs, then there became more of a clinical focus. And that focus has remained, I think, until more recent years on accruing hours, supervised hours for licensure. But we really are evolving in our understanding of what is the current purpose of postdoctoral training now. And so at this point in time in our field, we really do believe that there is strong consensus that the role of postdoctoral training is about accruing advanced and specialized competencies, and those might be in traditional substantive practice areas such as clinical, counseling, or school psychology. And in those types of postdoctoral programs, there could be a focus area or not. And so a focus area would not be a substantive traditional practice area or a recognized specialty, but instead would be a specialized population or problem, for example, working with PTSD, working with LGBT identified individuals, something along those lines. Or it could be about obtaining advanced competency within a recognized specialty to lead towards board certification in that specialty. And so this would be the case of clinical neuropsychology, rehab psychology, geropsychology, and so on. And when it comes to accreditation, again, as you've heard, not all postdoctoral programs are accredited, but for those that are accredited or seeking accreditation, they could be accredited in one of those substantive traditional practice areas or a specialty area such as clinical neuro, rehab, and so on. So that's how we're really thinking about the role of postdoctoral training these days. If you're interested in finding more out about how we're thinking about postdoctoral training, I would direct you to a recent publication by Silberbogen and colleagues that came out in 2018 in TEP. And as soon as I sign off, I'll go ahead and type that citation into the chat so folks have it. So I think I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Holohan to talk about the importance of fit when you're looking at postdoctoral programs. All right.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Excellent. You know, when you're applying for internship, I know it's always emphasized what fit means there, and trying to make sure that you're picking a place that meets your needs and that the feelings are mutual. I think with a postdoc, certainly you want to make a fit with the site, but you're also looking more in particular at maybe being a fit with a specific specialty area or emphasis area, which may be a little bit different than what you were looking for internship. So trying to find a fit in both of those areas, you're going to want to make a compelling argument in your cover letter, in particular about why that specialty or emphasis area is a logical next step for you. And if you've had less experience in that area, really trying to figure out how you communicate why that next step is important to you and how it makes sense with your experiences that you've had thus far. Sometimes people are making a turn a bit in postdoc training, and that there's something that they came upon more in internship, and that maybe in graduate school they had emphasized less, but they've really made a shift in that direction is really where they want to spend more of their time, similar to some of the reasonings that Allison gave for for participating in a postdoc. So our recommendations would be to make sure that you're making the argument of why you want to make that shift and how that shift makes sense for you, so that no one else is making that decision. You know, if someone's just evaluating your CV and you've spent all these years doing child work, for example, and then all of a sudden are wanting adults emphasis PTSD postdoc, really want to make it clear how you came to be at that place and how your past experiences have made you a good fit for that postdoc, and why in particular you're seeking advanced training in that area. Also, we often get asked about the pros and cons of applying to more than one emphasis area at any one site. So one thing to keep in mind is that as we're looking for fit, if you're applying to my site, for example, and applied for 4 different emphasis areas, it's really hard to make a compelling argument that each specific emphasis area is really your ideal fit. We certainly have folks apply to multiple emphasis or specialty areas, but it's really important to make sure it's been you're making an explicit argument about why each of those would be a good fit. And I'll spend some more time when we're talking about interviews about how to potentially handle that.
But oftentimes the postdoc, each emphasis area is evaluating your application separately, and so on its own value, you may speak to one area as being particularly a great fit, and then on another application speak to how great a fit you are in the second area. But then there's usually a training director or a coordinator that's evaluating both of those things. So you want to make sure that what you've said in one application isn't contraindicated by another application, because they may be reviewed by both. All right, I think I'm going to wrap up there because we're playing a little catch up, and turn it over to the next speaker.
Hi again. Can everybody hear me this time? Can I get a yes in the chat? Perfect. Okay. So now I want to talk about why VA postdoctoral training might be an excellent choice, and I assume you folks are considering it since you're on this webinar, but I think it's important to highlight some of the things that I think the VA does well when it comes to postdoctoral training and why this might be a good fit for some folks. One thing that I think that's very nice about the VA, and you heard a little bit about this idea of OAA, this Office of Academic Affiliations, and so one of the things that's great about VA postdoctoral training, whether it's within the MyRec system or within more of our clinically focused positions, is that those positions are funded by Congress through OAA, which means the positions are funded in a stable manner, as stable as Congress is, right? And so the focus of these positions is on training, and not so much on generation of billable hours to fund your own training position. And I think that may sound like a minor detail, but for those of you who have been in settings outside of the VA and had that pressure of funding your own position, I think you can appreciate that when the focus really is on training and the dollars are secured for that, it can feel quite different for the training involved. And so, of course, clinical service delivery is typically the modality by which the training occurs. So you do need to see patients even within a VA training environment, but the focus is very different. It really is on training and not generation of money. And so I think that's something that the VA does quite well. And so that's sort of two-part. One, the stability of the funds, and two, then that makes the focus about training even at the postdoctoral level. And another thing that I think is really important about VA training is that the VA healthcare system and the mental health system is the largest mental health system in the country. And there are things about that that can be challenging because it's a very large organization. But there are also some things about that that can be quite beneficial. And in particular, I'm thinking about the implementation science effort to disseminate education and training to our VA clinicians in a number of evidence-based psychotherapies for the common mental health problems that veterans face, such as PTSD, depression, substance use disorders, and so on. And so I think there's really nothing that parallels the VA's efforts in this particular domain, and our staff benefit from it, and our patients benefit from it, and then you as postdoctoral trainees and interns and practicum students all benefit as well from these efforts. And so many psychologists at a variety of sites are involved in the dissemination initiative, either as clinicians, as supervisors and consultants, or as trainers. And then that, of course, benefits you as a postdoctoral trainee at any given site. Of course, the involvement from the faculty varies from site to site, so it's important that you do your due diligence when you're researching programs, because what's available in terms of EVP training to you as a postdoctoral fellow at one program might be different in one program versus another within the larger VA system. And still, overall, I would say the EVP training focus is the strength of VA postdoctoral training. Another thing that I think is really important about VA training is that I do believe it represents social justice work in the fact that, you know, veterans are often underserved populations, and often veterans in rural and remote locations wouldn't be getting services at all. Really, the VA is a healthcare safety net organization for people who wouldn't have access to healthcare, certainly this caliber of mental health care. And so I think in that sense, whatever your personal politics might be about war, taking care of veterans who are harmed by war is something that is social justice work, and those veterans represent lots of other underserved identities as well. And so you have the opportunity to do that work within this organization should you be a postdoctoral trainee with us. So I think that's something that's unique and important. Another thing that's pretty exciting about working as a psychologist in the VA is that you really do have the opportunity to serve in a variety of roles. So whether it's a leadership role, an administrative role, a clinician role, a researcher role, an educator role, there's many ways to be a VA psychologist. And of course, what that means is for postdoctoral trainees, you have the opportunity to participate in a number of those roles too, to see what is a good fit for you. So the focus can be broader than clinician only, although that is an important role. It's just neat to be able to try on other domains of psychology, being a psychologist in the VA. And you typically would have the chance to do that. Again, it's going to vary program to program, so it's important to look at each program's brochure to see if there are opportunities to engage in service and administration and so on within each specific postdoctoral position that you're considering applying to within the VA. And then finally, of course, if you train within the VA, you're well prepared to become a VA psychologist. So if you're interested in pursuing a career in the VA longer term, postdoctoral training in the VA will help prepare you and kind of put you in that pipeline for a future job in the VA. So those are some reasons why you might want to consider the VA uniquely as an institution for your postdoctoral training. Thanks. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Jackson.
All right, can everybody hear me? Yay. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the importance of diversity in training at the VA. One of the real strengths, like Dr. Osbet was mentioning a moment ago, of training in a large organization such as VA is that your training director or program director will have the benefit of shared resources with other people doing similar work around the country. It's really one of the great things about working in a national system. And so that shared community of resources really makes a difference in terms of making programs stronger, introducing new ideas, sharing resources, and all those types of things are important in improving the training of the trainees that we have. One of VA psychology's really large priorities is training in multicultural issues. So consistent with that priority are national VA initiatives to offer support resources for VA psychology training programs. So if you're interested in diversity, or if you're interested in just being prepared to work with a wide range of individuals, VAs can be a really wonderful place to train. When we're talking about postdocs, we're thinking about really specializing and beefing up your skill set in a particular area. But even within a particular area, if you're working in geropsych or if you're working in primary care or neuropsych, there are numerous diversity variables and a really diverse population that you'd have access to in working at a VA. And sometimes that's not always the stereotype that VAs have. People have kind of an idea of what a traditional veteran looks like. But we really do see a very diverse population in a number of areas, in addition to being able to reach out to those individuals that were mentioned a little bit earlier that work in rural populations, live in rural areas, and are able to receive services via teleservices. But in terms of ethnicity, age, ability, military culture, socioeconomic status, LGBTQ status, gender, all those kinds of things, you can get it all at a VA. You would be surprised. And trainees often are surprised at the breadth of training experiences that they really can have within a VA. So since we're a national agency, you have opportunities to interface with trainees and staff around the country about common issues. So we have a national diversity listserv where trainees and staff can ask questions or share resources related to diversity topics. And there are articles that are distributed regularly, typically monthly, related to various diversity issues that might be happening nationally or that might just be topical. There are quarterly diversity consultation calls that focus on topics like interventions for race-based stress and trauma we had a few months ago, religion and spirituality and mental health, cultural competence in VA multidisciplinary teams, and a number of really interesting topics where you can just have conversations with folks from all over about some of these different areas. In addition to training modules that are provided for training programs to teach on a host of diversity topics. So when you're applying to sites, with regard to diversity, when you're talking about cases or experiences with other professionals in your interviews or in whatever materials you might be submitting for the program, be sure to talk about your own cultural variables and how that impacts your thinking and your work with clients to demonstrate your knowledge of your own stimulus values. Sometimes people really get in the weeds about some of the different factors related to whomever the other is in the example, but really can lose sight of some of that self-awareness that's important in recognizing what you bring to the table and how that affects your thinking and working with individuals. And also being sure to recognize different factors that come up in professional interactions as well. And so that's the gist. There are a lot of opportunities. You're going to have different opportunities depending on where you are. Every program is going to be within a psychology service or a mental health service that are all ranging in sizes and membership. And so it depends on where you're going, what kinds of specific opportunities in terms of committee membership and things like that you might be able to be a part of. But there are many, many opportunities to see a wide range of folks at VA, so if that's something that you're interested in, then the VA postdoc would be a good option for you. And I will turn it over to Dr. Schmidt.
All right, thanks, Dr. Jackson. Just a quick yes in the chat box to make sure everyone can hear me. Okay, great. And I'm sorry I don't have a webcam in the office I'm using today, so you'll just have to go with my audio. So we're going to shift a little bit and talk about some strategies related to applying. And I'm going to just talk fairly briefly about kind of how to decide which programs to apply to on one particular variable. And that is kind of picking programs on a range of how competitive they are. One of the things that first of all, I should say this is actually, the timing's great if you want to do a postdoc in terms of the market is pretty good for applicants. So if you've done well in graduate school and internship, if you want to work in the VA, your odds are great. But there is a fair amount of variability based on geographic location, for example, and size of program and so forth. So it's kind of a good idea to think that through. And just as kind of a general rule, if you have some flexibility in terms of where you're able to live, that can really bump up your odds quite a bit. So one thing I would suggest is to go ahead and just browse the different programs we have on psychologytraining.va.gov. We have programs all over the country, and there's a lot of great programs that may be a little bit more out of the way geographically, but just providing some great opportunities. So that's one thing that I would encourage you to take a look at. And sometimes you can kind of get a start somewhere and then start your career there and then maybe find a way to move down the road. So just something that sometimes people don't think about, but it's a great way to just bump up the odds that you'll match with a good program. And in terms of clinical specialties within VA, I don't think we have hard numbers on this, but neuropsychology is probably the most competitive subfield. And so just as an example, when the VA was expanding its training up until last year, they at some point stopped funding new postdocs in any field except for neuropsychology because that was seen to be the one shortage area. So just to kind of be aware of that neuropsych postdocs are probably a little bit more on the competitive side relative to other ones. But again, the same philosophy holds in terms of thinking that through and applying to programs that are kind of across the spectrum in terms of how many applications they receive. And then a lot of times we get questions about how many applications one should put in terms of postdocs. And that's actually a really hard question to answer because it's individualized and varied based on your specific interest area and again the geographic flexibility and so forth. So this is something that you just have to kind of think about, talk with your academic advisors, your internship training director, and other colleagues who may have gone through the process the year before. And again, your best bet is just to kind of start out with a pretty broad range, and then a lot of times once you kind of get into the process and you start interviewing and so forth, you might kind of get a better sense about how the market is feeling that year. So that year in terms of how many applications are still in play and so forth. So let me stop there and pass it back to Dr. Holohan so we have a little time at the end for questions.
Can folks hear me? I'm trying the webcam for the first time, so we'll see how this goes. Thank you. For interviewing preparation, I think some of the same rules apply as you would apply for internship interviews. You want to be yourself and be comfortable. You want to dress professionally. You want to prepare for the interview by reviewing the materials in advance. You definitely want to have a list of questions that you're prepared for. But there's some things in particular for postdocs that may be a little bit different than your interview preparations for the internship. So some of the things I think about for postdocs are, this is often a much more specialized interview, and so you often will have questions that are very direct about your emphasis area and specialty area, but you also get some of those questions about why do a postdoc at all, since, with the exception of neuropsych, it's often not required, so why not just do a job? And thinking through what your process is in making a decision to apply for a postdoc. And then similarly, if you applied for more than one emphasis area at a specific location, being prepared for questions about why you applied to more than one, how you would make a decision between those different emphasis areas, what is your priority in matching there. And there's often a lot less applicants that you're competing against for the same position. So on an interview day, you may see 3 other people that are interviewing for the same position versus on internship. I think sometimes that can cause a lot of anxiety, but also think about how wonderful it is that you've done so well to be able to interview there. And then thinking about it, it's sort of a buyer's market. So what do you need to know in order to figure out if this is the right fit for you? What kind of questions do you need answers to? Compared to internship, you may also just meet with one postdoc rather than all of the postdocs. And so thinking about how do you gain information from that person, and if you don't particularly relate to that person, is there a way to get broader information about postdoctoral experiences at the site? The other thing is that oftentimes on postdoc interviews, depending on how they're structured, you may have more informal time with staff, such as lunches or things like that, and so that often can cause some anxiety for some people, so thinking about how you want to handle if you have some more informal time. And then lastly, I get questions all the time about whether interns should then travel for their postdoc interviews or do Skype or do telephone interviews. And certainly different places have different preferences. I would pay attention to the program materials to help guide you. It's also helpful if you've already visited a site. That might be helpful information that you have a context of what that site is like. Certainly, if you have an option to have some video component, that's why I'm trying out my webcam, it is helpful to be able to read cues. So I personally enjoy meeting with people in person. It's easier to figure out fit. But if I have a preference, if I have a choice between an audio or just telephone interview and a webcam, it gives you a lot more information that you can take in with the visual cues. So, but those are all personal preferences. It's really hard to go to all the interviews and to travel, as you know, from internship interviews. But certainly you want to show interest and be able to get the information that you need to make good decisions. And I know we're short on time, so I'm going to end there and allow time for questions. And I think Monica, over.
Sure. Great. Thank you so much to our speakers. So now we have about 10 minutes for questions. I just wanted to quickly review. There were 2 questions that were answered in the chat box. One about whether if you're applying for 2 emphasis areas in the same location, does that typically entail 1 cover letter or 2? The answer was from Dr. Hallahan, who mentioned that that's really depending on the site. And the second question was, let me scroll down here, related to, is it recommended, how many sites is it recommended to apply to? And Dr. Schmidt just answered that it depends on your area of interest and your geographic flexibility, and to review this with your internship training director. I see some people typing in questions, so I'm just going to give it a second, and we'll see how many we can get in before the end of the hour here. Okay. And we have a question from Shaylin. I'm considering applying for postdocs in conjunction with my partner. How does the application process change for me? Is there something I should put in my cover letters? Who'd like to take that one?
I can give it a try. This is Wayne. Within the internship, there is kind of a couples variable in the match where you can request to match in the same site or city. That is not true since there is no formal match with postdocs, or at least non-neuropsychology postdocs. I don't know that I would recommend putting that in the cover letter. I would recommend contacting the training directors that you're interested in and whether they could accommodate this request and what are the variables. I think just transparency is the best policy here, and be clear about kind of what you want, and is it a deal breaker? Would you not want to be at a program unless your partner or whatever was also selected at that program or a local program? So I'm wondering if any of the other presenters have input or additional input.
Dana?
Yeah, this is Joel. Oh, go ahead, Dana.
I was going to say, I don't know that I would put it in the cover letter, but certainly on an interview, if that's a factor that you're considering, I have had applicants say, what is the job market for other, from my partner like, and we're going to be making some decisions as a family or as a unit. So those are some of the considerations I'm keeping in mind. So I think usually on an interview, that's been a little easier to have those conversations in my experience.
Yeah, and this is Joel. I'll just finish that up. So I totally agree with what's been said so far. One consideration to think about, too, is when you get to Uniform Notification Day. This is kind of the old-fashioned way that internships were done before the match. And that may be kind of a difficult day if you're trying to match for two people. And unfortunately, I don't really have any great advice about it. But it is, just to kind of reiterate what's been said, it's probably a really good idea just to be transparent with the training director or directors of the programs that you're interested in. And hopefully everyone can kind of just work together to give both of you the best possible outcome.
Great, thank you. We have another question here from Charles. Should we have rec letters only from pre-doc supervisors, or should we send relevant practicum supervisor rec letters as well? It's like, Dana, you can answer it.
I say to have at least one from your internship. It's a little hard, and I also would make sure you just have the strongest letters that are applicable. You want the best letter writers that can speak to you and your experience and opportunities. The later the application is due, the more the expectation is that they're going to be from your internship. The earlier, that's a little harder too. But I would imagine that you're going to have one from your graduate school advisor often, maybe one from a practicum and one from internship, or two from internship and one from your graduate school, something like that.
And this is Sherry. If you're applying,
could I add on just a little bit to that? Is programs will be specific in terms of what letters they're wanting. So usually it's just not open-ended, like 3 letters of recommendation. They may say they want one from an internship supervisor, one from a DCT. If there's research in the postdoc, they may want one from someone who's mentored you in research. So programs can be very specific, and they might be different in terms of what they're wanting in terms of letters. So just pay attention to that.
Can you hear me okay? This is Sherry. The letters for our program, you definitely want to include some from the advisor, as you had mentioned, and certainly at least you'd want to have at least one, but the strongest from internships. I think that would be similar, but there might be guidance in the instructions, depending on the fellowship, that might lead you to make certain decisions on which are the strongest ones. But typically, I think most of the ones we get, there are usually 2 from kind of graduate school training, and then 1 from internship.
Great. I think we might have time for one more question. This is from Eric. If an applicant is geographically restricted, should that be included in a cover letter and or discussed during interviews?
I'll take it. It's Wayne again. I don't think so, because you're applying to that program and you really wouldn't want to talk to that program about other programs that you're applying to or you're not applying to. So if you're interested in that program, let them know that. There are no rules around that. But I don't think the program needs to know that you're any limitations about what other programs you're considering.
Okay, and we may actually have time for this question. I see that Dr. Asved already responded in the chat box, but Brianne asked, are there any costs associated with postdoc applications? The answer I see here is typical costs are the official transcript fees and the APICAS. There is a fee per application. I think we might have a minute or two if anyone wanted to add on.
This is Allison. I'll just add that if most of your applications are submitted via APICAS, one of the things that is helpful is you only pay for one official transcript when you use that platform. So while there is a fee per application submitted, there is only one official transcript fee. And so depending on what the requirements are for the different programs you're looking at, it may cost about the same, and also depending on what your university would charge for official transcripts, as if you had to pay for official transcripts for each one of the sites that you're applying to in the outside of APICAS way. So I think it just depends, and then depending on what the site wants, if they're not using APICAS, they may want you to send materials to them in the mail, or they may want you to email them. They may also want your API, and there's not a fee for downloading the API from last year's internship application, but if you didn't download it, that can be a problem because you can't get it back now that we've started the new API cycle. So those are different components, and some have costs associated and some don't, and so it just kind of depends on what programs you're applying for and what they require and what platforms they are using for their applications.
Great, thank you. I want to thank our speakers again and thank everyone for attending this event. We have been recording, and the recording will be posted on the Division 18 website within the next week. If you have any questions that we weren't able to answer today, please feel free to forward those questions to monica.roy@va.gov, and I will forward them on to the appropriate resources. And if you have any questions about the recording, feel free to email me as well. Thank you again.